You have made decisions about people within seconds of seeing them, and you have been completely wrong and you never noticed. You met someone and decided they were trustworthy before they said a single meaningful word. You watched someone in a meeting present a bad idea and found it more interesting than it was because of the way they looked or spoke. You gave someone a second chance they did not deserve because something about them, their face, their voice, the way they carried themselves, quietly told your brain that they were a good person. And none of this felt like a mistake at the time. All of it felt like perception. All of it felt like reading the room. What was actually happening is one of the most documented cognitive biases in the history of psychology, and it operates so far below conscious awareness that most people go their entire lives without ever identifying it in themselves. This video is going to show you exactly how your first impression of someone rewrites everything that comes after it. By the end, you will understand why attractive people seem more intelligent even when they are not, why your boss's opinion of your work is shaped by something that has nothing to do with the work itself, and why the people who feel most trustworthy to you are often simply the people who most resemble someone your brain already decided to trust long before you met them. Stay until the end of this, because what the research reveals about how this bias shapes your closest relationships is genuinely unsettling, and it completely changes what good judgment actually looks like. In 1920, a psychologist named Edward Thorndike published a study that was, at the time, considered a minor footnote in military personnel research. He had asked commanding officers in the United States Army to rate their soldiers across a range of qualities: intelligence, physical ability, leadership, character, personal habits, neatness, and loyalty. What Thorndike found when he analyzed the data was not what anyone expected. The ratings across all these different categories were almost perfectly correlated with each other. Officers who rated a soldier highly on physical appearance also rated them highly on intelligence, on leadership, on moral character, even on qualities the officer could not possibly have observed directly. Officers who found a soldier physically unimpressive rated them down across every dimension. Thorndike called this the halo effect, and in the century since, it has been replicated in hundreds of studies across dozens of countries, across professional settings, romantic contexts, legal proceedings, educational environments, and every domain of human social judgment. The mechanism is not complicated. Your brain does not process people the way a computer processes data, evaluating each variable independently before arriving at a composite score. Your brain takes an initial impression, usually formed within the first few hundred milliseconds of exposure, and uses it as a primary filter through which all subsequent information about that person is interpreted. The first trait your brain assigns to someone creates a gravitational pull. Everything you notice afterward gets bent toward it. A person you have initially coded as warm gets credited with intelligence when they say something smart. The same observation from a person you have coded as cold gets registered as calculation or manipulation. The information is identical. The judgment is completely different. And the most powerful trigger of the halo effect, the one with the most consistent and well-replicated evidence behind it, is physical attractiveness. Research by Karen Dion, Ellen Burschid, and Elaine Walster at the University of Minnesota in 1972 established what they called the physical attractiveness stereotype, the near, universal tendency to assume that what is beautiful is good. Attractive people are rated as more intelligent, more competent, more moral, more socially skilled, and more trustworthy than their less attractive peers, even by evaluators who are explicitly told to ignore appearance and focus only on objective criteria. The bias does not respond to instruction. It responds to awareness, but only when that awareness is active, deliberate, and effortful. And most of the time, our judgments are none of those things. This has real consequences that go far beyond social awkwardness. Studies of judicial outcomes in the United States have found that physically attractive defendants receive lighter sentences for the same crimes than less attractive defendants, controlling for race, socioeconomic status, and the severity of the offense. Research in academic settings shows that teachers who rate a student as physically attractive at the beginning of the year assign higher grades to that student's work throughout the year compared to the grades of less attractive students who submit identical assignments. In hiring contexts, studies consistently show that attractive candidates are more likely to be hired, offered higher starting salaries, and evaluated as more competent during interviews, even when interviewers have reviewed identical resumes beforehand. The halo follows the person into every room they enter, and it does most of its work invisibly. But here is where it becomes more personally relevant, because the halo effect is not only about strangers and surface-level first impressions. Trust has been broken or where conflict has become chronic. The same person who once seemed attractive, competent, and full of good qualities begins to seem somehow less of all those things. Not because they have changed, but because the negative halo cast by the damaged relationship has begun reprocessing the same information toward a darker conclusion. This is why the person who was perfect before the betrayal seems, in retrospect, to have always had warning signs. The negative halo restructures memory. There is a dimension of this that the research rarely discusses directly, and it may be the most practically important one. The halo effect does not only shape how you judge others. It shapes how others judge you, constantly, automatically, and in ways you can actively influence. Your first impression in any high-stakes context creates a halo that will follow every piece of work, every idea, every mistake you make in that environment afterward. A strong entry into a job, a relationship, or a social group creates a positive halo that makes your subsequent contributions seem better and your subsequent failures seem more forgivable. A weak entry, a hesitant first meeting, an awkward early interaction creates a negative halo that requires significant counter-evidence to displace. This is not superficial. This is how human social cognition actually works. Understanding it is not vanity. It is literacy in the language your brain is already speaking. There's also a secondary effect that is less studied but just as important, which researchers have called the horn effect, the inverse of the halo, where the halo generalizes one positive quality across the entire impression of a person. The horn effect generalizes one negative quality downward across the entire picture. A single moment of rudeness from someone you do not yet know well can downgrade your assessment of their intelligence, their competence, their moral character. A single, visible failure can make a previously admired person seem suddenly less credible in domains that have nothing to do with what they failed at. The human brain is not looking for a balanced evaluation. It is looking for a category. Once it finds one, it defends it. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist whose work on cognitive biases earned a Nobel Prize, describes the halo effect as a product of what he calls associative coherence, the brain's tendency to build a consistent story about a person rather than holding simultaneous contradictory assessments in mind. Contradictory information about someone makes the brain uncomfortable. The halo effect is partly a mechanism for resolving the discomfort by suppressing or reinterpreting any information that does not fit the dominant impression. This is why people are so genuinely surprised when someone they admired turns out to be dishonest, or when someone they dismissed turns out to be exceptional. They were not holding incomplete information. Their brain was actively filtering out the contradictory evidence to maintain a coherent story. So what do you do with this? The first and most important shift is developing the habit of deliberately separating what you know about someone from what you feel about them. When you find yourself with a strong impression of a person, positive or negative, ask yourself specifically what evidence created that impression and whether that evidence actually speaks to the quality you're now attributing to them. The fact that someone is confident does not mean they are competent. The fact that someone is awkward does not mean they are untrustworthy. The fact that someone's idea came from a person you respect does not make the idea better than the same idea from someone you have never heard of. These separations do not come naturally. They require effort, but they become more reflexive with practice and the quality of your judgment about people, about ideas, about work, changes meaningfully when you start making them. The second shift is one of protection rather than correction. In high-stakes first impressions, where the halo will form whether you like it or not, invest in the quality of your entry. Not to manipulate perception dishonestly, but because you now understand that the impression you make early does not stay in the moment where it was made. It travels forward into every subsequent interaction, shaping what gets noticed and how it gets interpreted. You're not presenting yourself for that first moment. You're setting the filter through which everything that follows will be read. You have been judging people your whole life through a lens your brain installed before you were old enough to choose it. The halo effect is not a flaw you can eliminate, but it is a mechanism you can learn to see. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere, in how you respond to your colleagues, in how you feel about your oldest friendships, in the gap between who someone is and the story your brain has already decided to tell about them. Drop a comment and tell me, has there been someone in your life whose halo, positive or negative, turn out to be completely wrong? No names needed, just the experience. And if you want to go deeper into the invisible forces shaping your judgment every single day, the next video is waiting for you.